I spent hours learning about blockchain technology, so you don't have to. Phrase of the day is ledger, part 4. Most people have heard a lot of bad stories about people using blockchain technologies. Probably heard about meme coins and rug pulls. The collapse of FTX, a crypto-focused exchange, was a big deal in the news. And of course, there's been plenty of other crime, spam, scams that have caught attention. But at this point, blockchain technologies have been at least in some use for over a decade, despite all of these failures. So presumably there has to be something about them that makes people continue to believe in the potential of the technology. As I focused on the term ledger, this has been one area where the potential of blockchain networks is somewhat obvious. In part 3 of the series, I focused at a high level about how ledgers are something software developers, people providing the apps you use, all these kinds of things, actually need to build their service. I pointed out how there are plenty of other technologies, other types of services that these developers use. So why might a blockchain network be especially good for a software developer who needs some sort of ledger? Why might they plug into the capabilities of that blockchain network to build their own service? This made me think of the story of Synapse. Synapse was explicitly a ledger service. Initially a startup, it grew to be a decently large company. Its initial service was operating as a ledger service, an intermediary service. It did this for a new class of fintech or financial technology apps. These apps provided banking interfaces, generally with some particular user interface or user experience feature that people wanted. But most of them didn't actually build out their own banks. Their edge was in the technology, the software development piece. And there are plenty of banks in the United States. What Synapse was supposed to do is track money between people who were depositing funds on these accounts and the actual banks where the money would be held. If all went well, software developers would be able to show some account balances to their users. Those account balances would be correct, and no one would ever think about this. The money would be correctly sitting in a bank account somewhere. More accurately, it'd be sitting in the banking system somewhere. And that would be okay. But again, at the middle of all this was Synapse, specifically Synapse as a ledger service provider. Synapse was built in a way that's very different from blockchain technologies. It was one centralized company building its own tech stack, writing its own software, and its ledger wasn't publicly verifiable. It wasn't just out there in the open for researchers, investigators to review at any time. It was just kind of a normal tech company. This all at least appeared fine until April of 2024. Synapse collapsed. And in the aftermath, people realized that Synapse wasn't actually a very good ledger, or it wasn't operating its service as a ledger very well. I remember reading articles months after the Synapse collapse that they were struggling to actually track down where a lot of the funds had gone. But again, no one knew before the collapse. It wasn't a public ledger. You couldn't just go look at the transactions and how they were being logged. In the wake of the collapse, over 100,000 people lost access to their funds. Hundreds of millions of customer dollars were left in limbo. I found a 2025 article that indicated that all the funds still haven't been found. This is an example of how a bad ledger can cause a ton of disruption. The structure being described here could of course happen in the blockchain world, but it wouldn't make as much sense. If the goal for someone was just to hold funds in some interface and have it tracked by some ledger, that would be very simple. I've discussed self-custody before. I've talked to some software developers building on top of the Solana network, and they echoed this sentiment. From their perspective, using the Solana network, they could just build the same kind of interfaces people were building for their banking customers. There would be no ledger service. The accounts could just be Solana network accounts. The amount that would display on the interface would just come directly from the Solana network. This is because blockchain networks like the Solana network have a built-in account structure and are ledgers. This is downstream of self-custody. So when answering what is a ledger and thinking of the story of Synapse, you can think about it from a software developer's perspective. With something like the Solana network, a software developer doesn't have to build their own ledger, and they don't have to trust different third parties to handle the tracking of accounts and the account structures themselves. They can just directly embed the technology that's inside of this blockchain network. It's account and ledger, one and the same. And these blockchain networks are purpose-built to be ledgers. The development of the ledger system is taken very seriously. One of the core features software development approaches to these networks is to have the code and also the transactions be publicly verifiable. They are public ledgers. So there are plenty of experiential problems people have had or have read about when it comes to blockchain technology. But there's at least something appealing for a software developer who needs a ledger solution. And this is just one way of thinking about ledgers.